Good morning.
What's your nationality?
Irish.
Drive it on, thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe starting with shots of a ferry is a bit misleading. This will not be a road trip episode, nor will any episode that arises out of this trip that we've just done together. It was really a fact-finding mission, a mission to get into the UK, find some people that I wanted to talk to and interview them, and that's what I did. I actually lined up 7 people, spur of the moment, last minute. Some of them had been kind of vaguely teed up before, some not, and I managed to nail down 3 of them, which I think was good going. I was 4 days in total. We covered 900 miles. And she took it like a champ. Absolutely knuckled down and worked like a Trojan. A lot of motorway and even a couple of hours in rush hour London traffic. So in this episode, what we will do is spend quite a bit of time checking her over and trying to get her ready for the trip. So here's the first bit. We're going for these dodgy brakes first, and as it turns out, they're probably going to remain a little bit dodgy, but not an immediate safety concern. So the first thing was the disc was moving freely. That was a good sign. Now what we have here is the 2 pads either side of the disc. They're held in by these 2 pins, which are in turn held in by these 2 clips. So before I did anything else, what I tried to do was free up the inboard piston. I knew that was the one that was a bit dodgy, that was sticking a bit. And I got a cold chisel and a hammer and I tapped the pad on the front of the pad to push the piston back. Now if we look a bit closer, you can see all of the meat left pretty much on the inboard pad because it wasn't being used because the piston was seized. On the outside pad though, it's almost down to the backing plate. This, by the way, is a spring. All it does is stops the pads from rattling. Now it's no coincidence that there's rust showing on the inboard piston and none on the outboard piston, and that is the inboard piston being the worst for wear, and obviously this is part of the reason it's sticking. So I kept on working these pads, these pistons in and out, using the brake pedal to push them back out and using the hammer and cold chisel to push them in. This, by the way, can displace brake fluid, so you need to be careful about what's happening at your reservoir if you're doing that. And the least we need for this side is a set of pads, which I'd have to order. But before I put everything back on, I gave the wheel a wash, and you can see this rim isn't in the greatest nick. This rust, this kind of exacerbated rust, is probably from the heat cycles that the rim was being subjected to because the outside of the caliper was working hard and overheating. So over to the near side, and again, the disc was spinning freely, and by the way, these discs are in great nick. There's good meat on them. They're barely worn actually. They are slightly grooved, but that happens. I'm not too fussed about that. When I had a look at the pads, they've worn much more evenly on this side. So again, just a symptom of things being in decent nick. So I went to wash the wheel. Oh, what was that? Did you see that? So this rim is in better nick and back on it went. Before we leave the underside of this car, I want to show you the underside of this car. It is in such good condition. There is one tiny localized bit of rust up here in this arch, and there's another one down this rail, but look at the general condition of this. This car has aged so well. It has made it through what most of these cars didn't, and that is 30 years of existence. Now, before we go into the engine bay for some fundamental checks, what I'd noticed on startup is that almost overnight it had gotten quite smoky, and that's not normal. So the first place I went for was the dipstick. And although it won't seem like it here, the oil was not registering on this dipstick. What you see here is just the residue from coming out of the dipstick tube. This thing was very low on oil. Now remember, I am not a mechanic, but this is something that I feel has kept me in good stead through the last 20-25 years of playing with cars. I always check my oil with a white rag or a piece of tissue or something so that I can see exactly what color the oil is. If your oil is gold or brown, it probably has some life left in it. If it's black, it not only needs to be changed, it probably needed to be changed quite some time back. The other thing you should be checking for, and the reason why a white rag is a good idea is you're looking for other liquids here, other colours, because depending on the engine and its state of wear, you can have coolant make its way into the oil, you can also have fuel in some cases make its way into the oil, and you have this phenomenon of an engine that seems to be making oil rather than using it. Anyway, I topped this thing up, but I had to borrow about 2.5 litres from the guys at Flawless just to get this thing up to par on the dipstick. Over to the air filter, and it is black. This obviously missed a few service schedules. It should be long gone. It is completely clogged up, and definitely the reason why the car smelled like it was running rich. Not enough air was getting into this engine, so that's another thing we have to order. The carb on this car is a variable Venturi carburetor, which I had to look up, and it turns out an SU carb, which I'm much more familiar with, is a variable Venturi carburetor. I did not know that. I will rebuild this carb at some point just to clean it up, and hopefully I'll have had my head round what a variable Venturi carburetor is by then, and I will be able to tell you all about it. By the time I got to check the startup again, it was getting dark, but you can clearly see here things are greatly improved. The last little bit of oil burns off here, and the car is running as clean as I would expect. And the reason why, I suspect, is that your oil cools the engine just the same as your coolant. But if your oil gets low, it works much harder, it ends up getting way hotter than it's supposed to, and when it gets hot, it gets thin. And if it gets thin enough, it can make its way past piston rings, valve stems, get into the bore and start producing smoke. So a routine oil check is a fundamental part of caring for a classic car. The next thing I tackled was a very dodgy tyre on the near side front. All the rest of the tyres had been changed except this one and the spare, and they were both matching Goodyears, definitely from back in the day. I reckon these were original tyres on the car. You could tell by the tread pattern they weren't made today or yesterday. And this tyre was very badly perished. And I have to point out, when I got this tyre off the car, it made a hell of a difference to the steering feel. Things got better. Anyway, I went to a guy, Mal, who's been looking after my tyres for years now. He's a great guy, and he got stuck in to getting the old tyre off and a nice fresh new one on. Let's have a look at the old one. You can see the sidewall is completely perished. It's full of little hairline cracks. But if I press on the shoulder of the tyre where the tread pattern starts, you'll see just how bad this tyre is. This was no thing to have on the car, knowing I was going into the UK. Even driving around, this tyre had it. I won't go as far as to say it was an accident, but it was certainly a mishap waiting to happen. And when you see the spare, you're going to see that I'm not kidding around. The spare is an identical tyre, remember, and it hadn't blown out, it had literally just started to disintegrate. So we pulled that off too, and we swapped them round, and while Mal was at it, I asked him would he actually take the offside front wheel off because the rim was looking shabby, swap it out for the spare rim, and we'll put the old Goodyear tyre that's still in some way usable onto the spare. It's fine for now as a limp home. So with everything swapped round, balanced up and back on the car, we were starting to look in better shape for our trip into the United Kingdom. The next stop was the Motor Factors, where happily a lot of these service parts are over the counter or easily ordered with a quick turnaround. So we'll get those parts in and we'll tackle some more on the Cortina later on in the episode. The Cortina will be back before the end of the episode. I did get some time to work on both the Range Rover and the Esprit, and you might wonder what's left on the body of the Esprit. Not a lot. You know, I had high hopes when I started Soup that I would keep this place immaculate. There would be perfectly stacked shelves with all the parts on it, everything would be safe and ordered. Well, it's all I can do just to keep this ticking over, and I'm even taking stuff home to alleviate some of the space problems I have here. Anyway, take my word for it that as I go through, things are being looked after as best they can, and we're just getting on with the work. So, one of the things I hadn't done yet was take the brace bar for the striker plate out of the near side. So that came out, there was no problem there, same as last time. And I scanned across the car to see what else needed to be done, and I realised it would be easier to lift the body off with the coolant header tank, the expansion tank, out of the way. So I went to tackle that, and I noticed there's a big dent in it. Another of the Esprit mysteries. I don't know how this happened or how it could happen. This is quite a robust steel tank. Anyway, it obviously got a bit of a squeeze at some point. There was an earth strap on one of the two bolts that hold it in. The nuts came out no problem. Oh look, new gloves. And with a little bit of prying from my favourite screwdriver on the lower hose on the tank, out it came. Scanning around again, I noticed I still haven't fully taken these handbrake cables out, so I went to do that next. They run underneath the fuel tanks, down along a channel in the side of the car between the engine bay and the wheel arch, and through the floor down to the inboard rear discs. These pieces of almost surgical looking rubber I think are the remains of a breather system for the fuel tanks. I'll have to research that because I've no idea what it's supposed to look like. So under the car, the cable comes down and meets the arm for the discs, and you can see here it's just a push through fit. I cleaned it up a little bit with a wire brush, and then after a bit of struggling managed to pull out the offside one, and out that came through the body. Now the near side one runs across the car, it's longer obviously, and just to keep it in check there are two little straps that bolt through the rear floor. You'll see them now in a second. I released it off the caliper and then went for these two little check straps. No problem there. The car continues to be a joy, having no rust on most of the fasteners. I think that's all going to change when I go for the chassis. I think the fasteners on the chassis look to be a bit seized. We might have headaches there, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So out that cable came, and finally the handbrake is out of the car more or less. Around to the front, I realised that the bonnet catches are still on the car, so I took out the offside one first, over to the near side. No problems here, this is all really simple stuff. And here they are on the floor. As ever, all the fasteners, bits and pieces, all go back together for future reference. Now, before we leave the Esprit, I know it's a short section, there were concerns that the windscreen up on the wall might leap out of the brackets and smash into a million pieces. Well, let me tell you, where I've put this is a good 60 feet from the nearest door. There really is barely a breeze at the worst of times in this unit. But as soon as it was suggested, I realised I had to do it because the freak occurrence I told you so would be unbearable if something did happen. So I made up a bracket. I even rubberized it just to over-engineer things. And after remembering that I wasn't 8 foot tall and I was going to need a ladder, I cinched it up on a bracket that was already on the wall. And guess what happened next? Nothing. I'm not that ham-fisted. How'd you going? Okay, that's up there. This windscreen is going nowhere. Rest assured, it is safe. And we will not be going near this again until it comes down to be refitted to the car. All being well. There you go. Alright, that's the Esprit section for this episode. Let's keep going. It's time to give a Valet Pro care kit to somebody, and this time I'm going to give it to a man called John Rimmer. John sent me some photos, but this one really did it for me. I reckon he may be trying to mobilize some kind of a small army, so if we keep them occupied with a care kit, I think we're all safe. John is working, and his boys are working on their Mitsubishi Montero. That is a Shogun depending on where you are, and in Ireland it's called a Pajero. And it's kind of common knowledge here that in Spanish, at least in slang I think, pajero is a kind of a naughty word to describe a fella that rhymes with banker. Anyway, John seems to be really in love with his Pajero, his Montero. They call it Monty. So John, this is on the way to you. I hope you and the boys get a kick out of polishing her up. Other people, Kieran O'Sullivan sent me a picture of his Mini. He was going to drag it out because it was a nice day, which is the perfect thing to do. And speaking of Minis, Bevan Brady's wife's Mini is a shade of pink. I don't think I've ever seen a Mini in, so I thought I'd show you that too. It looks like a lot of fun. In the last episode, I said that Mark Holtum has a Pontiac Fiero and I showed you a picture. Well, I got it wrong. It's Matthew Holmes's car, and both guys were very good spirited, had a bit of fun about it. And Mark was worried that his wife might wonder where this Pontiac all of a sudden came from. So, sorry gents, and here's trying to put it right. Okay, if you want to send me the story of your car, some photos, the email is in the About section of the channel. Click on my name, click on About, and you'll see my email address. You can send me details there. Okay, I did get a small amount of time to work on the Range Rover. It is the shortest section of this episode, but I did reproduce the second panel, the mirror image of the one we did last time. And there was a few little tidbits in there that I think was worth seeing. So, here it is. The next job was to complete the same repair panel from the near side onto the off side of the rear boot floor. And I deliberated over whether you needed to see this again, but there are a few little pieces in here that I think are worthwhile pointing out. So here we go. This is just the original template I made, flipped inside out. And straight away, you know, this car is obviously symmetrical side to side, certainly in the boot floor, and this was going to be fine. So over to our steel stock, and I marked it up and cut it out. Now you probably notice I'm leaving a piece out there. This one does not need to be, it's not as rotten on the offside as it was on the near side, so this piece of metal doesn't need to be as big. Now, I got the suggestion to flip the jaws of the vice round, which I thought was a great suggestion, and then I realised as soon as I got them off, they're not countersunk, so it can't be done. Back on they went, and we got on with bending the piece of steel. Here's where there's something interesting. This secondary bend I'm about to make here, you see it happening. I did this on the other side of the car by sliding the long nose vice grips in on this piece of metal and literally physically bending it round. On this side I used a hammer on the top edge of this and bent it down. Now this did result in some damage to the nice straight edge. So I used the lump hammer as a hand dolly and just used the hammer to do the straightening out, which works really nice. I think this is just a fundamental of metalwork. But in lieu of hand dollies, you can use any piece of metal that has a good flat surface on it and you can get a grip on in your hand. So this straightened out really nicely. Again, there's those little ripples from the vice jaws, but like I said the last time, I like those. It's, you know, this is not a concours car. It never will be, ever. So a quick bend on this, and this is a panel that's almost good to go. Now, I ran out of time at this point. You can probably see that it's darker in the unit. And in it went. It's a little bit too long on the end nearest the foreground. I'm just going to trim that back, and I would say the next time we'll be offering in the rear cross member, and after that we can weld these pieces in, which is going to be exciting. Alright, in proper road trip style, or maybe it's just my kind of road trip style, this last section with the Cortina happened on the day of the ferry crossing just hours before. Here it is. All the parts are in and we are on the clock. Now, something I hadn't mentioned was there was a rattle. There was a vibration in the car and it was getting louder. And then there started to be a knock at the back. And I had kind of guessed it was something to do with the exhaust, although I thought the vibration was probably the heat shield you see at the top of this picture. Turns out the flange that holds the exhaust downpipe to the manifold was starting to come loose on one side and it was literally rattling. You know, my philosophy with these kind of things, with anything on a car, is no matter what you're doing, you try and put it back better than it was. So I wanted to take these out, make sure they were clean up the threads and put some anti-seize on them. And I forgot my anti-seize. Well, that's a different story. The thing is, I could only get one bolt out. The second one was seized, and as I tried to force it, I could feel it starting to twist. And I didn't have time to go pulling the manifold and start putting a new stud to replace the one I was about to shear. So I left that one and tightened up the one that I got out in the hope that it would be enough to hold the exhaust, and it was. That ain't going nowhere. Okay, air filter next. And just to illustrate how black this thing was, wait until you see it against the new one. There you go. These things are just like sieves, and if you can imagine just clogging up a sieve with dirt, not a lot's going to get past, is it? And by the way, if you've always wanted a classic and you've been off put by not knowing anything about maintenance, what you're seeing here is fundamental stuff and anybody can do it. Sticking with the intake and the fueling and the carb, I noticed that there was a weep here on the carb. It had been going on obviously for a long time. You don't get this much kind of build up of gunk overnight. And when I looked closely, I realized that the fuel feed pipe here, the end of it didn't look too healthy at all. And sure enough, it's very frayed and it's starting to kind of delaminate and come apart. The inside of it looks all right, admittedly, which is why it isn't spraying fuel everywhere, but it was enough to let a little weep out. So what I did here was got a blade. There wasn't a lot of slack on this pipe, so I didn't have much choice but only take about 10 mil off the end of this. It was enough to clean it up. I pushed it back up onto the inlet of the carb and I moved the Jubilee clip down as close to the bead on the end of the pipe as possible and cinched it up nice and tight. Then I cleaned up the carb because this conscientious thing to do here is to keep an eye on this and make sure it's not still weeping. And I can say now, I don't have any footage, but so far so good after 900 miles. The last thing I did before I pulled Tina inside to get at the brakes, because it obviously started to rain here, was put the roof racks off my Mini onto her because I had a fancy that I might find something in the jumble of the classic car show at the NEC, and I didn't want to be stuck for being able to get it home. Okay, onto the rear drums. Off the near side rear wheel came and into the drums, and these are something I've never dealt with before. These are self-adjusting brake shoes. I have to get my head around these, and it turns out I didn't get to get my head around them because the set of shoes that I got from the motor factors are actually the wrong ones. There are a couple of different types for this model running over the few years it was produced, and obviously these just weren't the right ones. I tested the handbrake anyway. It's not operating perfectly, but it is operating. There are no leaks. The shoes are worn down quite close here. They're not completely worn, it has to be said, but they obviously are worn enough not to be effective because this car does not hold itself on any kind of an incline. There was no point in going to the offside rear, so I went straight to the front to get the new pads in. And again, this is a very simple thing. Most calipers are the same. You've got a spring and pins that hold in the pads. All you need to do is drift those out. They usually will come out with just hand force. You don't need any special tools. And then you pull out the pads. New ones go back in the same way the old ones come out. You rub a little bit of grease on the back of them, copper grease, so that they don't squeal, and Bob's your uncle. It is almost as simple as that. You can service the brakes on your car yourself. There are some provisions you need to make so that your fluid stays in good order, you don't draw air into the system, and you don't overflow your system, but I will talk to you about all that stuff another time. The ferry is in about 6 hours from these shots you're seeing here. This was a case of get it in, make sure it's solid, and we'll deal with anything else later. I was packing a big toolkit, by the way. Don't be in any doubt about that. Maybe you're not the kind of person who likes the club feeling. Maybe the old bod's a temple and you're caffeine free. Well, I've discovered that the beauty of a Cars and Coffee meet is that nobody expects anything from you. It's not a club kind of vibe. And on a cold and fresh Sunday morning, you can have a hot chocolate instead. I had been absent from any Cars and Coffee meets. I've only been to 3 or 4, but I hadn't been to one in a long time because I had no car. So it was high time I made my way back up. There was a meeting of Cars and Coffee Northeast, and while I was up there, it kind of dawned on me, what if somebody wanted to do this in their area? Maybe in your area there is nothing like this and you're the guy. So I collared the organizer of Cars and Coffee Northeast, and here's what he had to say.
Paul Gartlan, and I am the man who started Cars and Coffee Northeast, and here we are in DKIT on our 10th outing. We wanted to see more people, wanted to see more cars on a more regular occurrence, rather than 5 or 6 car shows would come up at once and people would hither thither, which one they were going to go to, etc. And I think a lot of people bringing a car into a mucky field maybe wouldn't be the thing, and maybe parking beside tractors, and there's a bit of uncertainty about what shows or what, I mean, apart from the big car shows that are only car shows, a lot of them are mixed in with smaller organizations, and so I think this was just pure cars is what drove me to do this. I did. Well, I spoke to people in Dublin, and they were very good to give me some hints. And I spoke to the people in Galway, and I gave them some information back. Like we've a strict set of rules that everyone gets a copy of, and I've shared that online a number of times. And we're not trying to compete with anyone. The country's big enough, funny enough, and we're far enough away from all of those places that we can attract our own group of people. We get a lot of people from Northern Ireland, for instance, and people who maybe wouldn't want to travel as far as Dublin. Well, it's in Wicklow now, or Bray, are happy to come here. And we hold it a lot earlier in the morning than most of the other ones as well. We start at 9:30. So we've people who come here maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30. They see enough cars and they're away maybe to a Sunday event of their own, or maybe a car show. So they can get the two in at the one day. You don't have to put that much work into it, but it's mainly online. We don't pay for any advertising. I've paid a few euro to Facebook to promote the events. Basically, it's word of mouth now at this stage, and I think people feel coming here. It's unlike most cars and coffee events. We're the only one that's fully insured that I'm aware of, so we can promote it. Most of them aren't promoted because, well, they're in public car parks, so they don't have that ability to promote them, because if something goes wrong, well, then who promote it? They're the people who are going to be in the firing line. So we have a great relationship here with DKIT, and this is a private car park. So it means that once we have our insurance in place, if anyone was acting the maggot, which nobody has, and touch wood, so far, we can say out you go. In a public car park, you haven't that ability to tell someone to leave. 5 or 6 people generally look after it, and we keep the lid on it, and we keep everyone happy and sweet. Oh Lord, no. We encourage people to give us maybe a €2 donation per car. They don't have to. Some people don't, and that's perfectly fine. Come ahead, and that's just to go to offset the insurance costs, which are pretty strong. The first month we were here, we just paid for it 1 month at a time. I'm just looking at a Lamborghini over my corner. It's 12:20, and we're over at 1 o'clock, and there's a stream of cars still coming in, so that's good. So the first month we were here, the insurance cost, we just did it for 1 month to see how it went. It was €330. So that you couldn't do that every month. So we did a deal with the insurance company for the year. So that €2 goes to just about break even, I'd say. But that's fine. That's all we want to do. Yeah, it is a passion. So that's it. I mean, I my eyes are darting around here as I'm talking to you, because different cars I haven't seen before are catching my eyes. So that's it. We're just car guys, Oh, no, modesty forbids. I have I could just say English cars and American cars and German cars. I have a Rolls Royce Silver Shadow 2 that I have. That's the longest one I have. This, the new enough edition SL500, I have a Porsche 996 Turbo. I have a year one Trans Am, a 1977 Trans Am, nice car. And the last machine I bought was a Ford F250 1975 monster truck. So a bit of a mix there, and I have a wee Suzuki SJ410 as well, and a couple of other things I'm looking at the minute. So big, brash, noisy, four-wheel drive, go anywhere, bit of crack. It's a bit like the big Camaro that was here today. It's very loud, and it's not very expensive, but it's you get an awful lot of bang for your buck. We do. I mean, we occasionally you'll have maybe like Terranure. We say it fell on the same Sunday that we were here, and we had a couple of events like that would diminish the crowd. But generally there'd be 100 cars here at the very worst day. I'd say today there's probably 300, and some top-notch machines here. You know, we've a string of Porsches, new ones, old ones. So it's an eclectic mix, new and old. Oh, there would, of course, yeah. But I mean, you know, over the year, it's proven that it's going to cover itself. So even coming up now, the renewal will be in February, you know, and you know, I'll put the few quid in again if it's not there, but it has to be there because that's our deal with DKIT. We must have the insurance. Oh yeah. We got a couple of hundred caps made. It was my idea, and I went for an embroidered look, and we spent a few quid on them. And we it's just to promote the event. So we just said, look, we just sell them for what they cost. I think that their cost is €4.80 or something. So we're selling them for a fiver. You know, it's just, but it's more people buy them, and more people see them. You know, that's it. It's the publicity, I suppose, a bit of marketing.
I don't think anyone would begrudge you €1 or two on top though.
No, but we're, you know, again, we're not here to push it too much. You know, if people come up to us and buy a hat, grand. You know, we're cool with that. And if it takes a year to sell them,
Nigel could have fooled me there on the way.
I think Nigel might be giving you one later. So we have no plans to do anything except be here once every first Sunday every month from here on in, rain, hail or shine. And it's shine today, thank God. So no, it's we're going to keep it going. I mean, as long as DKIT are happy, we're happy. You know, it's a great location, and it's easy to get to. You can come off the motorway from the north or the south, coming up from Dublin, and you're straight in here. It's a dream location for us, and we've spaces here, I think, for 450 cars or something like that. So my son goes to college here as well, so he's familiar with the number of car parking spaces.
It's at least half full, if not 3/4 full, isn't it?
Oh, I'd say it is, yeah. I'd say we're under 300 cars today, yeah. So, yeah, happy days. Long may it continue.
You know, on this trip, it was more of a recce in terms of road trip stuff. I did try shooting some little bits and pieces, but there just wasn't time to really get into exploring proper road trip angles and good fun that way. I plan to do more of these in that sense because I have some really epic road trips planned for when each car is finished. What I did do was I met two of the Esprit's previous owners. I met a guy who does very technical things in the engine design department in Jaguar Land Rover, and I met a fella who started a forum, a motoring forum that is now so big, so prevalent, that it's an official associate of the car mark it is concerned with. So I got some really wonderful stuff, and I got it largely in thanks to my patrons. So the new ones are Bob Bowles, Kieran O'Sullivan, Christian Diodore, Daniel Lancel Kenny, Ian Bannister, Ed Dicker, John Rimmer, Stephen Calvert, Tom Dowdswell, and Tony Crinion. Gents, with each one of you, the possibilities open up further and further, and you know, I'm just getting started. There is some amazing stuff out there that I really want to go and get and bring to you, so thank you very, very much. All right, that is it for episode 15. I hope it was fun. We had a lot of fun together. I'm only sorry I couldn't show you more of the road. There are some little bits and pieces that will pop up in the episodes as they come in the future when I bring you some of these guys that I've met. And until then, good luck.